Hi, welcome to another episode of Infinite Leaders Live. I'm Lewis Keynes, and our why is simple: to be better educators and to be better humans. We want to support and encourage infinite learning, regardless of role, rank, or responsibility in all walks of life, and for people to be willing to listen and to learn. As ever, I'm joined by my desert friend, Alan Dunstan. How are we doing, Alan?
Yeah, cheers, Lewis. All good, mate. Really good. Back at school this week. It's been amazing, and we'll continue to focus on the things you don't get taught at university or on any courses. Real life lessons from real life people with real life experience.
And as you know, if you've listened to any of our podcasts before, we record live and you get what you're given, really, and warts and all. It's raw, and there will be mistakes as we go along. We love the feedback that we receive. If you've got any feedback at all, whether constructive or positive, please let us know. We do fully believe in what we're doing, and we strive to get better. We're very fortunate to have some great guests on, and today is no exception. Please, if you can, share today's episode on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and you'll also find it at theinfinitelearners.com. So listen, learn and share, and let's get cracking.
Yeah, get your pens and paper ready, guys. There's going to be some absolute gems of wisdom coming out of the show today. So Jo Hackett is a PE teacher at heart who has worked her way up through a range of independent schools within the Midlands area of the UK. She started her career as an NQT at Kimbleton School, and she's moved on to become head of girls' sport at the prestigious Uppingham School. From there, she became the director of sport at Northampton High School, where she worked for 10 years. Jo was a founder member of the Sport Matters Committee to review the competitive sport programmes across 25 girls' day schools and became a trust consultant teacher for sport and PE. This role led Jo to carve her own direction, which she's continued as Director of Sport for the Loughborough Schools Foundation. So welcome to the show, Jo. Great to have you on the podcast. And tell us a little bit about your role at the Loughborough Schools Foundation.
Hi, both. It's great to meet you, and thank you so much for inviting me on today. I started at the Loughborough Foundation last September. So obviously I did just over a term before lockdown and everything else. It's quite an unusual role, actually. So my role at the foundation is incorporates 4 very different schools. So I'm director of sport across 4 schools, and I have a head of sport in each of the 4 schools. The schools are Fairfield Prep School, which is quite a big prep school for kindergarten through to a year 6. Then I've got Loughborough High School, which is an academically selective girls' secondary school. Loughborough Grammar School, academically selective boys' grammar school, and then Amherst School, which is non-academically selective. It used to be a girls' school, but is now co-educational, and it's for students 3 through to 18. We're all on one site, and we all share facilities, so completely centrally located in Loughborough around a shared set of facilities. So I get my steps in every day. I walk around all 4 schools and visit all my departments and things like that. So when the role came up, for me, it was just really quite exciting, quite an unusual role. It's the first time I've done a non-teaching position as well. So, which is really very different. So I think, when I started last September, I'll be honest, the first month, I wasn't used to planning my day. I've always planned my day around my timetable, around my lessons, and worked in pockets of time. And all of a sudden, I needed to kind of get used to that, but in a very different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Tell us about some of the challenges that you faced then, all on one site, 4 different schools, loads of different staff. What are you coming up against?
Yeah, it's really, really different. So the schools are completely different. I would say until recently that the facility sharing probably hasn't been fantastic, and it's something we're definitely working on. But the schools have run completely independently. They've run separately. Each department's done their own thing. They've all got a head of sport. They've all done what they want to do. But obviously, parents often have students who are in more than one of the schools. So there is a competition between the schools, and actually, the schools are quite traditional. They're quite traditional in their sporting offer. And as in a lot of independent schools, I think the demographic for sport and the demographic for pupils that are within schools is probably changing a little. And I think independent school sport possibly needs to start to think about that a little bit and think about matching the sporting offer to the students that are in front of them. And this is something that I'm working on with my heads of sport, and I strongly believe in. yeah, I mean, obviously I didn't plan to start my career working in independent schools. I kind of fell into that. I applied for jobs at state schools and independent schools, and invariably, I think because the notice period's longer in an independent school, my first interview was at an independent school, and that was the job that I got. And my sporting background fitted, actually, because my main sports were, you know, hockey, netball and tennis. So I fitted perfectly with a traditional independent school model of sport 20 years ago. And I have to say, I absolutely loved the extra time that I had with the students and working on developing their abilities and where they were going in sport. But I think then from obviously my first job at Kimbolton, and then I moved on to Uppingham, where I picked up a lot of boarding opportunity. You know, I did a lot of work in a boarding house as well as within the students, and it was again a different role. And there's such a pressure in independent schools to be successful and for your teams to win, and that is the main focus I've found in my time working in these schools. And I certainly I fed into that, certainly for at least the first 10 years of my career, I would say. So yeah, so that it's and I think, you know, actually this year is probably been quite enlightening, because I think there are no fixtures, and I think it is making people like me, and hopefully like lots and lots of other heads of sport, sit back and think, well, hang on, what are we doing this for? Who are the fixtures for? Who is the competition for? What are we getting out of this? And it's made people step back and go, hang on, let's actually reevaluate. And that's certainly what I'm doing, and I'm working with my team to do at the moment. So obviously that wasn't quite the question I don't think you asked me. You asked me something about the issues in my school, but I've kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent.
No, but it does give us a really nice insight. You know, I think it's worth exploring what an independent school looks like in the UK in terms of sport, and you've given us a really quick overview there in terms of sport is seen as a very competitive element of school life where winning is really important. There's now been this period to pause and reflect on why that's the case. Can you put your finger on a reason or two as to why there is that tradition in independent schools, and why winning and why that profile is so important?
Do you know what, I obviously I think for me, when I worked at Uppingham, and obviously I started there as head of girls sport, and a big part of my job on a Saturday was to put out 25 plus teams. So whether that was netball teams, whether that was hockey teams, you know, we wanted as many students as possible playing in those team sports. And it was like, you know, at year 9, at under 14, we wanted teams A to D. We wanted to tell our parents that every child played team sports. I still believe that every child should have the opportunity to play team sports. I think what they learn from team sports is phenomenal. The skills that come around them is so important. But I actually think there is a big distinction, and for those people who haven't worked in an independent school, big independent schools like boarding schools, you know, any in the country, they tend to have a PE program and a games program, and sport tends to be in their games program. Until relatively recently, most independent schools, in the big independent schools, boarding schools, for example, would do sport Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday afternoon. And all the teachers would do it. Every kid would do it. The schools would cram all their kids onto their facilities for 3 afternoons a week. And then all their facilities would sit there for the rest of the week not being used. And if I'm brutally honest, I don't know the reason why that happened like that, but I think it happened like that because it always had done. Independent schools are like this, and we don't change things very easily. So change doesn't just happen. There has to be quite a big reason, or a person, or something that promotes this. And it always fascinated me that, you know, I sat there and I looked, and I'd got 3 AstroTurfs at Uppingham that weren't used for 4 afternoons a week, and yet I put the whole school on them for 4 hours on the other 3 days. And I just used to think, I wouldn't need 3 AstroTurfs if the timetable was adjusted. And I think independently, I know for a fact that Uppingham changed their games program now, and I've done an awful lot of things moving forward. But so for me, when I left Uppingham, and I'd kind of, you know, I absolutely loved it. I loved my time with the kids. I loved my Saturday afternoons. I mean, obviously I went into sport because I'm competitive. I came from a sports family. I was very lucky. I always knew I wanted to work in sport. My family all played. My sister was a professional tennis player. So I'd seen the elite sport as well as the sort of more community-based sport. I'd kind of been in there myself and had the rough end a little bit, like I was an all right tennis player, but I wasn't as good as my sister, but people presumed I would be because we were from the same family, got the same surname, both from Lincolnshire, and obviously not many elite sports people came out of Lincolnshire at any point. So so it was just a different time, I think. And so I went into this and just thought, well, I wanted the students that I was teaching to be able to experience sport like I had.
Okay. So
sorry, Lewis, I've got a question, I think.
No, it's great. I don't want to interrupt you. I think my question would be around what's the role of a school in developing, and you touched upon it there, elite sport and high sporting performance, versus maybe one of the others you mentioned there was that sort of community feel. Where's the line for a school? What responsibilities do they have to engage children and give them opportunities through multiple teams versus being really good in terms of performance in elite sport versus community feel?
So I would say, certainly from my background, moving on and moving to Northampton, I had worked in schools where it was all about teams. It was all about team performance. It was about as many students as possible participating in teams, even if they didn't really want to, if I'm really honest. And quite often the background to this was the school needed to show that they were fielding 30 teams on a Saturday, rather than the fact that it was the right thing for the students. And did the students really want to play? And those were the days in that era was it was all about field. How many teams could your school field? How many fixtures did you have on a Saturday afternoon? And that was sort of the marketing offer of the school, and that was the key focus for I think independent schools. But I'm pleased to say, I mean, I moved on. Obviously, I worked at a day school. I've been head of sport at a day school for the last 10 years, and the work I've done with the trust, and now the work I'm doing at Loughborough. And I think society's changed. Students have changed. Students vote with their feet now. Students won't turn up and play on a Saturday if they don't want to. The compulsory nature of saying that all students have to play in a team sport, even if they don't want to, has gone. And students need choice now. And I think so important is offering that variety and offering the change of the chance for students to do an individual sport, to train in a gym and learn how to use fitness facilities correctly, to develop the skills around sport. I mean, I don't agree with early specialisation. I do not agree with people being zoned into a sport really, really early. I think the range and the opportunity to take part in so many different things is so important. And obviously one of the things, one of the big things we're working on at Loughborough at the moment is we're revamping our PE curriculum. So we are very much looking at a much more pupil-centred approach to PE, and looking at the skills around sport and the reasons why they should be doing sport, rather than focusing directly on learning a sport for the fact that you've got a match on Saturday afternoon.
So let me just interject for a second there. You've said yourself that you weren't necessarily all for working in an independent school. That was something that sort of happened organically. Now you're in there and you spot these things and you're talking really passionately and enthusiastically about all these different opportunities that children could have. How do you, as a director of sport across 4 schools in the Loughborough Schools Foundation, start to make those changes? How do you change that culture of independent schools putting out teams for the sake of putting out teams, dare I say, because it looks good and it helps their profile?
Yeah, it's not easy, and it's not going to be easy, and we're at a sort of a changing pivotal point. And for so many students, I don't want it to sound like I don't agree with team sports, because for so many students, playing in a team is absolutely amazing, and it's the thing that they thrive for. The big driver for me, and this has been the case certainly since I took on my role at Northampton and working in the trust, and now at Loughborough, the thing that drives me in the role that I'm doing, and the main value, that the thing that everything comes back to with me, is I want kids to do sport when they leave school. Now, I don't actually care what that sport is, but I want them to learn and develop a healthy, active lifestyle. I want them to carry on. So I need to make sure that me and my team of staff have given them the keys and the toolkit that they need to be able to do that. And we all know that the percentage of kids that leave school now and will go and play rugby or hockey or netball or you know, whatever it might be, is relatively low. But at the same time, they probably, if they don't get the opportunity to try those things in school, when will they try them? And when will they know whether they like it or don't like it? So for me, school is so much about opportunities and about giving different opportunities. And sport is about well-being. And actually, we've just sort of like rebranded our PE, or in the process of rebranding our PE curriculum. And this idea of, we're going under this sort of acronym of WELL, and we're looking at sort of well-being and exercise for learning life skills. And that's kind of, that sort of ideal is underpinning our PE program now, to try and give the students the chance. Now, I am a team sport player at heart. I'm a competitive person. I love sport. I love competing when went in my younger years, and actually find it quite difficult that I don't compete now. And now I'm a parent. Actually, I look at things a little bit differently as well. I think my focus has shifted. I'll be honest, in those first few years, I remember saying to kids, crikey, on a Saturday afternoon, oh my God, you've ruined my weekend because we haven't won. I mean, I look back now and think, gosh, that must be a horrendous thing to say. And then I think about it now and I think, actually, there's loads of teachers that still say that now. At least I've realised, and I've looked at it and thought, hang on a minute, actually, I look at my last school and staff would come back for tournaments and they'd given their whole day to it. Do you know what? The kids had a fantastic day out. They actually weren't that bothered about the result at the end of it, but my staff were devastated. They're moaning about umpiring decisions and all the things that you stand there in the office going, oh God, please tell me you haven't said that in front of those students. That isn't what they need to hear. And the kids have just had a great day out, to be honest.
It sounds like there was a reflection there. There was a conscious decision from you at some stage to really think about what you used to do, which you've alluded to there. You've said some things to children in the past that probably weren't the right thing to say and that you regret, haven't we all? But where did those moments start to come? Can you remember any of those moments where you started to think, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel right, or this could be done differently?
Yeah, do you know, it's really interesting. When I took my role at Northampton, on my actual interview for the high school, the head who interviewed me, I learned such a lot from her. I thought she was absolutely amazing. And on my interview, she actually said to me, I'm looking for somebody to run this department differently. I'm looking for somebody to come in here and change everything and sort of really grow our program. And I, all of a sudden, because I'd sort of gone to the interview and I hadn't really heard of the school and I wasn't really that bothered. And then all of a sudden my ears pricked up at that point. And I remember it really clearly. And I remember thinking, oh, well, this is the sort of thing that could really interest me. And then once I started there, and I spent quite a bit of time in my first term reviewing the curriculum and working with her, to be fair, about changes that we wanted for the programme. And it was a school where, if I'm honest, if the kids were sporty, they were encouraged to go to clubs. They were encouraged not to do the sport in school. And that was completely alien to me. I'd come from, I'm fielding for 25 kids on a Saturday afternoon. So all of a sudden, I needed, 25 teams on a Saturday afternoon. All of a sudden, I needed to grow this programme. And she actually asked me in my, not a couple of years in, well, in my first term there, she asked me to go on the committee for the Girls' Day School Trust. And sitting there and discussing things like the number of days students were having out of school to take part in competition. And it was probably the first time that, the Girls' Day School Trust are all academically selective girls' schools, pretty much. And it was the first time I'd sat there and thought, hang on, they're having nearly 30 days out of school a year to take part in sports competitions. That's 2 staff every day. What are we doing? What are the kids who are left in school doing? And it was those moments where I thought, well, hang on, we're offering sport here for a few, not for everybody. And And that's not what it's all about. For me, the C team playing on a Saturday is actually the best bit about the Saturday now. The A team, they will get better. They will do well. They'll carry on with their sport. But those in that C team, the fact that they're coming out and they want to get better, and they're developing the skills that come with sport in an environment that they feel comfortable with. So any particular moment, I have to say, I think for me it was working with that head, and she actually then put me forward, and I spoke at a conference for and it was all the heads and all the directors of sport, and it was a conference for the GDST. And I actually stood there and said, look, when I started at Northampton, it was about kids going elsewhere if they wanted to do sport, and that's, for me, is criminal. That's the worst thing that can happen. And I'll be honest, the conference took a few turns. I mean, I think the big takeaway from the conference is that people were talking about that they should put hairdryers in girls' changing rooms and things like that, which, I'll be honest, was not something that was sort of where I thought it was going. But anyway, but it was just really interesting that I think for me that was probably one of the big sort of shifts, and one of the times where I thought, no, actually, this is about, how can I put a sporting offer together that engages all the students and offers something for all of them, basically. And I remember going back and sitting there at school and saying, hey, and standing up in assembly in front of the whole school and basically saying, every single student in this room, I want to be going to a sports club. I want every single student to be engaging with our extracurricular program. So if there's not something on there you want to come to, you need to tell us and we'll put it on. So, and that's basically exactly what we did. And it wasn't easy. You guys work in schools. Probably the hardest thing about my journey, I guess, sometimes is bringing the staff with me. And I think staff, convincing the staff that when I've worked with some amazing teachers, but often, they're quite set in their ways, and they might not want to put the extra time in or see the benefit or see the reason for doing it. And let's be honest, sometimes I've asked people to do things that perhaps weren't the right thing, and I'll hold my hands up and they, oh, hang on, we got there in the end. But yeah, it's just trying different things to come up with ways to engage those students for me.
Yeah, I think we're getting into a little bit of leadership now, Jo, aren't we? And how are you bringing staff along to get in line with your views, or not so in line in some cases? Just talk us through what your core values are, please.
Ooh, so for me, my core values, I think I mentioned this already, but I think for me, it's got to be about doing everything I do, everything I want to strive to achieve is for students to be practical and to engage with sport afterwards. So for me, any core values has been like to engage, and it's sort of about forming relationships, and sport for me is completely about forming relationships. So relationships comes right up there. So I think leadership and sport just a hand in hand with that. So I guess for me, it's about sort of like hard work, empathy, and teamwork, I guess.
Yeah, and just to paraphrase there's some key, really powerful words there: relationships, leadership, hard work, empathy. If you were to look on any top styles of leadership, those words would be in there. How do you then lead this team that you've got? You've got 4 schools, 1 site. How many staff have you got, Jo?
Loads. I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest.
Loads. So how do you get them buying into one vision and to really work together and have a culture that you want to create? That's got to be tough. Yeah,
it's really hard, actually. And I think for me, starting that, and I'm only 12, just over 12 months in, and let's be honest, I haven't been at school for quite a large period of it, and quite a lot of my staff have been furloughed for quite a large period of it. So it is hard. And I think not only have I got to sort of buy in my team, but also I've got to buy in the people above me. So I'm line managed by one of the heads, and above me is an executive committee that any big decisions, any things we want to change, obviously goes through the committee. So which is for me at the moment is the 4 heads and our COO. So it is hard. I like to think I'm quite personable, and I like to think I work well with people. And for me, as I sort of alluded to there, the main focus probably this year has been about developing the relationships of the people that I work with and working out what sort of makes them tick and where their strengths are, because it's all about trying to play to the strengths of the team. I mean, and obviously at the moment, that's something I'm trying to look at, and how we can better play to the strengths of the team, and ways that, you know, perhaps we could adapt the structure. And in fact, this year we've already started to share quite a lot of, so move staff between the schools a little bit to work to their strengths. So and hopefully this is something that we'll do more of, which I think is great for our students. You know, they get to see people, you know, obviously I need to know, you know, we're looking at developing pathways and movement systems. One of the big things that probably last year, the big thing that changed for us last year was actually really not what you would necessarily think was a big thing for us, but we actually rebranded our sports kit, which sounds like a simple thing, but obviously when you've got 4 schools together and you want to put all 4 schools into the same kit, and the decision has been made they want to go into a branded sports kit, actually like rather challenging. And we all the heads of sport sort of worked with me with this, and the executive agreed to make some changes. But the really interesting thing for me is I got sort of 50 kids in a room, 50 senior school students, and we sort of got this down to three kit suppliers, and put them in front of the students and said, okay, look at the stuff. We showed them the things, we talked about the brands and so on, and all 50 students chose the same kit, which I couldn't foresee for a million years. And they all chose it because it's made of recycled water bottles.
Oh wow!
And they wanted a sustainable sports kit. Well, for me, it was like a dream, because all of a sudden, I've got the best marketing message in the world. I've got the first sustainable tracksuit. I mean, it's amazing. But it just fascinated me that was so important to them. Now, I can almost guarantee that if I'd done that, in fact, I did a rebrand at the high school when I started there. It wasn't even on a mention. It wasn't even on the page. And this is one thing that I thought, hang on, this shows where students' opinions and where their mindset and where what they want from their school and their future is changing massively. And it's just an example of how obviously we've then got to work with that for that to happen.
How important is that, Joe, getting children on board and listening to their opinion?
I think it's really important, because ultimately we're putting a program in place for them. And I think the only thing I would say with you know, I think student voice is fantastic. I do think don't perhaps always put too much value on the student voice, because sometimes they haven't tried everything. So until they've actually tried something, how do they know if they like it or don't like it? And the one thing I would say, certainly from my experiences, students are very much just like we are, just like I am. They're relationship driven as well. And they will go to a subject or an activity because they have formed a relationship with that teacher or that coach. And sometimes, you know, positively or negatively. So it's really important that we're focusing on the activity sometimes when we're looking at student voice and student activities, rather than sometimes going with the teacher or the person that they like. I had to not name the staff who were doing the activities on when they got their options choices, and I often threw real curveballs with which staff were doing which activities, so that once they'd gone to it, they were like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And the other thing is I did a mixture. I actually, like you say, I made them all do some activities that did take them out of their comfort zone, because that is what sport's about. It is about learning to take risks, and you might not necessarily have that opportunity in a maths lesson or an English lesson, but we can naturally manufacture this to happen in a games lesson or a PE lesson or whatever, which I think is so important. It's interesting. This year we've, you know, obviously you said about working with my team and moving my team forward. So one of the things we've done this year is we've actually invested in a program. So we've invested in a program called Functional Movement Systems. And I have to say, I mean, I've only done this now for nearly a term, but it's really, really interesting. So we're screened all of our students within the foundation. And then we're sort of looking at how their movement functionality can help them with their well-being and so on. And so they all get a report and they sort of get their own movement flows and their activities. And the idea for me is that looking after your own movement capacity and your own well-being becomes as important as brushing your teeth. So if you so maybe 5 minutes a day you spend working on these sort of corrective movement exercises that are specific to you. Now, you both work in schools. You know that I've emailed these out, they've been emailed out to all of our students. Some of them are like all over it. Some of them are like, oh, this is brilliant, I want to do these exercises. Some of them haven't even opened the email. So now I've got to work with my teams in all 4 schools to get them to sort of engage fully with the program, even if maybe some of them aren't fully invested in it, to engage with the program, to then share my enthusiasm for the program with the students themselves, and sort of try and get the students to then be looking at these movement flows and these exercises. And I hope that over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, this becomes a cultural shift in our schools. And this is something that, you know, in their form time, they perhaps work on their breathing flows or their shoulder mobility, or they're doing as a movement break in a lesson. And it's a real cultural ideal within our 4 schools. So that really wasn't what you asked me, but anyway, that was that's there you go. That's one of the things that we're sort of. It's one of the things that's given me over the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's funny, Jokes. We had Peter come and present to both myself and Lewis recently about functional movement systems.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and it is a very interesting topic, and we in our schools we're doing a lot of work with physical literacy and fundamental movement skills, and it could be argued that you can't even go near them until your actual body is right, because if you're trying to throw and catch, you can't do that if your shoulders are out of line and your hips aren't quite right in the right place. So it could be that that's the first step before we even try the next step. It is a very interesting concept, John. I'd love to hear more about that. What's the experiences with student feedback?
Yeah, do you know what? I obviously Peter started by presenting to me, and then we engaged with all my heads of sport, and all of us, without doubt, were like, this program is perfect. And exactly what you said, I was looking at changing our PE curriculum for this year, and I'm really looking at how. I'll come back to your question in 1 second. Really looking at how I think PE lessons have kind of gone down the route of, and they have done ever since I've started teaching. I'm guilty of putting out a PE program like this. You do half a term of badminton, then you do half a term of basketball, then you do half a term of gymnastics. Then if you're lucky and you've got a pool, you might do half a term of swimming. But how do they flow into each other? Well, they don't. What underpins all of them? Well, nothing really. And what skills are we making sure the students have got? Well, again, we aren't. So I sort of started this time last year and said, right, where do I want my year 6s to be? Where do I want my year 10s to be? Where do I want my year 12s to be? And so on. And then this is when I thought, well, hang on, are they physically in the right position to do any of this? So that's what made me think, hang on, let's take a step back. So exactly like you, I thought, right, let's put together a functional program. Let's get them all doing squats. Let's get them all doing lunges. Let's look at the strength and the speed, and put a program together like this. And then I thought, well, are they ready for that? And also, how interesting is that for someone? So I thought, okay, and I also thought, how ready are my staff to deliver this? So yeah. I went down, and obviously then it coincided with meeting with Peter, and in fact, actually somebody put us in contact, and I think, Peter at FMS is absolutely brilliant. And his experiences are fantastic. And the way he explained the program to me about, how it can help students to sleep better and walk better. And, we're in a global pandemic, and obviously one of the first things we teach them is to breathe through their nose, which has a viral filter. Well, obviously that suddenly made so much sense to me. So, so the program, exactly as you say, I just thought, crikey, this is perfect. This is exactly what our students need. How's it gone down? Now, the screening has gone down. Obviously, we've had to adapt, because in the past, FMS would come in and do all the screening for you. But they can't because of COVID. So we've sort of trained up all my PE teachers and my sports assistants to do the screening. And so I think some of the screening may not be as perhaps as accurate as if they'd come in, but it really doesn't matter. They get screened, they get a score between 0 and 3. So if you get it wrong, it's not disastrous. We're just in the process of working through the first set of correctives with them. And like I say, some students are really, really feeding into this. Some are looking at it, they're engaged with it, they are checking out their movement flows. The videos are fantastic. They can do them at home. Like some are just...
Joe, is that the same group of kids that are always engaged, or is it the kids that need to be engaged? And that's always the case in PE at the moment.
Yeah, actually, I would say this is probably hitting the kids who maybe we don't normally hit as well, because it's something that I think it's quite interesting that we're encouraging them to do these exercises themselves. And I think that's helping. The kids who perhaps don't want to be on full show and want everybody watching them doing everything is really important. And I think that's who we're really, really directing this at the moment. I think for us, some of the screening's been challenging, particularly for the really little ones. And I was a little bit nervous that some parents might go a little bit too far with it, but that seems to have been okay at the moment as well. I'm so excited to revisit this in sort of 6 months and in 12 months as we re-screen the students and see actually what impact it has made. And so it's really hard because we actually only sent out all the screening data just before half term. So we basically spent the first half term screening and we're just picking up gaps at the moment. But it's so exciting to see what happens towards the end of this term and the start of next term, and if they carry on with it over Christmas, and as we grow and we re-screen particular aspects. I think, and I'll be really, and obviously at that point, I will have a straight off idea of how many of which set of students it is hitting more than others. Because for me at the moment, it's just it's a lot of data for sort of 2,000 students, if you like, or near enough 2,000 students. So yeah.
But no, it sounds an exciting project. How do you do that? Is that's focused in curriculum, or is that an extracurricular thing, or is it linked together? How do you actually go about that?
Yeah, because we've decided to do this for all of our students from, we've actually screened reception through to year 12. We didn't do year 13 because we felt they've got enough to be dealing with. Like I say, that the pre-prep screening reception year 1, year 2 doesn't really work, but the exciting thing, we're now looking at a different program with FMS4, particularly for those students. So this is where I feel like we're in a great position, and sort of like quite groundbreaking for them actually. What we do at the moment, we've done it all through the PE program. Obviously for us, we only have PE in our senior schools up to year 9. So year 10 upwards have a games afternoon. So theirs has got to be done through the games afternoon for 10, 11 and 12. And that has been a little bit harder, particularly for the older boys, I think, who, their lessons are on a rugby pitch, for example, and sometimes not actually taken by a PE teacher. So getting them to engage with it is probably the hardest bit we're coming up against at the moment. But the PE staff are really, really on board with the system. And I'm just really excited to see where it goes and to see how, in 2 or 3 years' time, the students that progress from my prep school into my senior schools, what is their movement capacity? What are we in a much better position? And do they have a greater understanding of things, their movement capacity? It is really interesting that actually the younger they are, obviously, they score better because they haven't done any difficult problems yet. But it'll be really interesting to see how that drops off and how we can help it to pick up again.
Yeah, totally agree. It's interesting, Joe, because having spoke to the FMS guys, and I've got twins that are 11 years old, and my little boy at 3 years old, we spotted he had a really awkward gait. His sister was moving freely, and he went to a specialist, and he was diagnosed with something called Legg-Calvé-Perf disease, where the top of the femur doesn't fit into the socket properly. and the bad news at that point, which was pretty heartbreaking, was that he wasn't allowed to run, walk, jump for 3 years. So until the blood flow comes back to the top of the femur. Now, those 3 years between 3 and 6 are probably the most important 3 years of your life for fundamental movement skills. And at 11 now, he still doesn't move with flexibility at the hip. His core's not strong, and yet his sister's an unbelievable athlete, and they've been brought up exactly the same. And that underlines to me that importance of at 3 to 6 and at young age getting older kids, and you can see that progression. Joe, how do you feel about specialist lessons at that age and what benefits they actually bring?
It's really interesting what you've just said, because I was talking to a parent. He's a teacher in the foundation. One of his son had been a hip problem, and actually a really bad infection. In fact, they thought he was as a baby, and has identified in that particular side of his body and in that leg. And he was saying to me, oh, this is now all of a sudden we thought it had all rectified itself. And this parent had said to me, we were wondering if it is linked to that. We presume it probably is. And obviously the little boy has no idea. But for me, this is amazing, because I'm now looking at it going, well, we can do something about this. This child's in year 4. By these corrective exercises, we can help him so that once he gets up to senior school, he can walk. It's irrelevant how this affects his sporting progression, but he'll be able to walk better. He'll be able to sit more comfortably. Once they get, the older students, actually, if they develop their hip mobility and their flexibility, they can probably sit more comfortably in an exam room for 3 hours without actually having to shuffle about quite so much. So it's more than, going on. I mean, I hope that in time this progresses into a full athletic development program, and our top end athletes who are scoring perhaps really well on this really move on. At the moment, this program for me is about the students who, I don't know, you do a long jump and they barely reach the long jump pit. That it's about those ones. That it's about increasing the distance that they can jump and making their day-to-day life more comfortable and being able to move more freely. How I feel about specialising, I still struggle with the concept of specialising, but I believe that this program isn't necessarily about specialising. It's about their movement functionality, and so that can be adapted into any sporting context and any lesson that we may want to deliver. So for me, it's about bringing this into part, maybe with a warm-up, maybe in the activity, depending on the lesson content. But the sports program is about that variety for them, especially at that age. My children are 5 and 8. So, and I've got a child who's pretty much obsessed with a ball and spends all day, every day throwing or kicking or hitting or anything. And, and I look at it and think, well, I can't wait to be able to sort of screen him myself. I mean, they're not actually out of schools, but to look at how they progress and how it sort of affects them a little bit as well. So but I look at it as a parent, and I think back to my parents, and obviously, we some of there's 4 of us, and we played to quite a high level. But interestingly, I mean, I said my sister was a professional tennis player. My dad didn't encourage her to pick up a tennis racket until she was 11, and it was because she wanted to play. So I strongly believe that variety and a range of opportunity is the best thing for children. And if they have a passion, and almost, I think actually to become the best, they have to become a little bit obsessive. So if they have that obsessive nature towards that sport or towards that activity, they'll get there, whether they've started it at 5 or 11 or 12, irrespective, to be honest. I mean, I was lucky in my last school. I mentored Ellie Robinson, and I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of Ellie. Ellie obviously won the Paralympic gold medal when she was 15, and she came back into school from this. And it was amazing to have her in school with us and being at the top of her field and the top of her game, and with everything that she's gone through. I mean, obviously you mentioned Perthes. Obviously she had Perthes and couldn't swim herself for 2 years. So it was one of those amazing opportunities, and something I never thought in my career I would have the chance to do. So I think it's if children have that drive and that enthusiasm and that support network, they will go on to succeed. But as a teacher, my job is to give them the building blocks and the foundations in a variety of opportunities to have that chance to move on and have that chance to try something and find the thing that they want to carry on with and the thing they want to succeed.
Yeah, finding your passion that's come through all our podcasts. Really is. We're gonna wind it down now, Joe. We've got some quick fire questions just to answer towards the end. What are your 3 non-negotiables as a leader?
I think for me, it's dedication. I think, you know, I work really, really hard, and I'm very lucky to have teams of people that do exactly the same. Honesty is a definite non-negotiable for me. I'll get things right, I'll get things wrong, and I'll always hold my hands up to that. And you know, and I think you learn by your mistakes as much as you learn by the things that you do well and you do right. And teamwork and coming together as a team. I think that would be my 3.
Yeah, belting.
Well, I've got one for you, Joe. Obviously, you know, working in Loughborough, not the biggest city, but synonymous for a very successful sporting university and a really strong program across so many sports, you know, not just in the UK, but wider than that. What legacy do you hope that you'll leave yourself as Director of Sport at the Loughborough Schools Foundation?
Oh, that is a hard one. Legacy. Do you know, I think I thought about this actually, because I've listened to some of your podcasts and I thought about legacy when I was driving home the other day. And I think in my younger self, I'd have talked about, you know, having somebody that I'd coached that had performed to a high level and all this sort of thing. But now, in all honesty, the legacy for me moving on, and I think now I'm in sort of, I've moved on from a few jobs, and I thought to start with it was about building a program and leaving a program that was really, really good. And I think I've accepted that actually when you move on, the program changes because the person who's leading it will adapt that program to their strengths or weaknesses or whatever. So I think my opinion on legacy has changed massively. So my view on legacy now is there are 2,000 students within my foundation, and I want all of those students to carry on and do something as they go into later life. So my legacy now is about passing on my enthusiasm and my love for sport and exercise and for general well-being, and for those children to grow into adults and to have their own children and pass on things like the importance of functional movement, and pass on things like the importance of looking after yourself and taking time out for yourself. So for me, the legacy now is about those students having an active, healthy lifestyle and maintaining the skills that we've worked hard to teach them through their sort of childhood and adolescence.
Yeah, so using your fundamental movement skills alongside that real aspect of not specialising and giving the children choice across multi-sports to allow them to continue into adulthood and enjoy sport.
Yeah, 100%, cool. Yeah.
All right, last one, Joe. We love this one. We haven't asked it on the new series yet. What 3 leaders in history would you love to go out for a meal with?
Okay, so I hate these sort of questions. I never really think quick on my feet, but for me, obviously, I'm a sporty female, and I would love to sit here and list to you 3 really sporty females that have done great leadership roles, and I'm struggling a little bit. So I think I will have to go with, I think leaders in history, I would go with Nelson Mandela. I've been lucky to lead 2 sports tours to South Africa. And I have my brother-in-law is South African, who grew up in South Africa during apartheid, and is a sportsman himself and very keen on rugby. Obviously lived over here now. So I actually am very interested in sort of the impact of sport and apartheid and how that all linked together. So that would be one of mine. I think another one for me, I'm from my family we're quite a keen rugby family. So I would actually love to have a conversation and have dinner with Clive Woodward, because I think he's worked in 3 completely different fields and done leadership aspects. I'm really interested in his teamship rules and how he enforces his teamship and how he gets students and his teams to all feed into this and to go from that. And bizarrely, we actually had Lawrence Delallier visited school yesterday, and we walked around and he was talking to some of my students, and we'd been talking to them about writing a code of conduct. So we just happened to say to him, what's your take on this? And without realizing it, he was sort of talking about some of the sort of teamship things that I've heard sort of Clive Woodward talk about on podcasts or whatever in the past, about timekeeping and uniform and dress code and that sort of thing. So I suddenly thought, crikey, this would be real. I thought, that was really interesting. Now you hit me with it. That's one of the reasons I choose him. And for me, the third one is, and probably a new one, I think I'd probably go with Kamala Harris, the newly elected vice president. I think, she's doing a job that's perhaps a little bit stepped down. So she's not the out and out leader. So she's got to look at how she works on the teamwork and how she works in a supporting role. And being a female, I think for me, somebody like that in that role is absolutely amazing. So I think that would be my 3.
Yeah, the good shouts, Joe. If you get a chance, listen to Jake Humphrey and Damien Hughes' podcast with Clive Woodward on their.
I've heard it, actually. I've heard it. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
I love the bit with the teamship, and they all then got together and decided that their rule was going to be they're going to be 10 minutes early. I love that. If only I could get
Lombardi time, they said, didn't they? I love it. Brilliant.
but thanks.
Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me, and I've really enjoyed chatting to you both.
Likewise, Joe. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Guys, search Infinite Leaders Live on YouTube, Instagram, and on podcast platforms. We're on all major podcast platforms now, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And remember to visit theinfinitelearners.com. We'll see you next time. Thanks again to Joe. Bye.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.